We're here. Tyrell pushed open the car door and stepped out. Preston's team followed closely behind. He verified his identity with the security guard and walked past the gate. Preston's team was astonished. The last time they were here, the security guards had blocked them from going inside. They were only allowed to enter after they verified their identities. If Tyrell was granted entry without verifying his identity, then that could only mean one thing. He was a resident of one of the villas. If that were true, then Tyrell had run into Stephen before. It was very likely that they were neighbors or friends. This aligned with Stephen's bold attitude when his team had confronted him. He wasn't the commander anymore, so theoretically, his team had a higher status. It didn't make sense for him to outright refuse the request unless he was relying on his connection with a member of the Empyrean Circle. Preston hadn't expected Stephen to be close to Tyrell, but that didn't matter. Tyrell was duty-bound to protect the country. He couldn't be biased, even if they were friends. Tyrell trekked up the winding path. When he was a short distance away from the villa, he spotted his teacher in the yard. Preston pointed him out. "Mr. Tyrell, that's Stephen." "I know. You didn't need to tell me." Preston didn't say anything else and retreated behind him. Tyrell took a deep breath and strode towards Stephen. Preston's team watched in anticipation. Stephen was the reason they'd lost face during the negotiations with Warhawk's representatives, and he was also the reason why Sydney had reprimanded them. They couldn't wait for Tyrell to put him in his place. The closer Tyrell got to Stephen, the more nervous he became. He organized his words on the way there, but like his previous visit, his mind drew a blank when his teacher was in front of him. Stephen turned around and saw Tyrell leading a familiar crowd toward him. Preston didn't notice Tyrell's inner turmoil and called out to Stephen arrogantly. "Why aren't you kneeling? Do you know who he is? This is Mr. Tyrell Fallon, a member of the Empyrean Circle. It's an honor for you to meet him. Kneel and greet him politely." The elderly member of the team was annoyed that he didn't seize the opportunity to flatter Tyrell first. He hurriedly added, "Mr. Tyrell is here to ensure that you give us your technique." When the team saw them acting like this, they rushed to join in. "Stephen, I advise you kneel and give in to our request. No matter how arrogant you are, Mr. Tyrell is part of the Empyrean Circle. He ranks above you. No one will be able to protect you this time. Know your place." Tyrell was in a fluster, and it got worse when the team started ridiculing Stephen. "Is that so? Looks like you found a backer." Stephen felt somewhat betrayed that his student would follow these people to force him to give up his technique. He turned his attention to Tyrell. "What do you think, Mr. Tyrell? Do you want me to kneel and greet you?" His stern voice snapped Tyrell out of his daze, and under the disbelieving gazes of the team, he dropped to one knee. "No, I wouldn't dare request that of you." Preston's team was in disbelief. The elderly member was so shocked that he felt faint. The Empyrean Circle was the pillar of the country. Their status was only second to the leader of the Leviathan unit, the supreme leader and the sovereign. But Tyrell Fallon, a member of the Empyrean Circle, was on one knee, paying respects to the former commander in front of his subordinates. "Tyrell, get up," Stephen said. He'd thought that Tyrell and Preston's team were of one mind, but he never expected his student to disregard his status and kneel in front of everyone. Stephen couldn't deny that he was touched. He'd misunderstood Tyrell. He'd already retired from his position as the sovereign and returned to being an ordinary civilian. With this change in his identity, many people who'd once respected him had changed their attitude toward him. Someone like Tyrell was rare to come by. Before the Empyrean Circle, Stephen had never taken on a real student before. He felt a sense of pride that Tyrell's respect towards him hadn't changed despite their difference in status. Tyrell didn't move. He continued to kneel. "I'm only doing what's appropriate." The misunderstanding had been clarified, but Stephen didn't let it show. "Forget it, then stay like that." He swept his gaze over Preston's team. There was an intense look in his eyes that not just anyone could possess. Preston couldn't bear the pressure and kneeled next to Tyrell. "I apologize, Mr. Adams. If we knew your status sooner, we wouldn't have treated you with such disrespect." When the team saw Preston on the ground, they also dropped to their knees. They weren't fools. As elite negotiators of the country, they had a discerning eye for those who held high positions. They'd originally thought that Sydney was polite to Stephen because the Leviathan unit held the former commander in high regard. After all, his contributions to the country were undeniable. But when Tyrell knelt down, something had clicked in their minds. The only person the Leviathan unit would treat with this much respect was the Sovereign. The same person they'd mocked and looked down upon was the leader of the Empyrean Circle. "I told you last time, I won't be giving up my technique," Stephen said. "Please leave." Preston's team had criticized him for refusing the first time they were here, but now they were in the same situation again with newfound knowledge. None of them made a sound. They were afraid to even breathe. Stephen ignored them and went up to Tyrell, as if no one else was around. He helped him up. "Why did you follow them here? What are you trying to do?" "I felt responsible for causing this mess, so I accompanied them here." "Other people might not have caught on, but Tyrell, can't you tell? This is a trap. Have you forgotten what I taught you?" Tyrell lowered his head. "I know this is a conspiracy, and I'll never forget what you taught me, but what?" "I have my own reasons." Tyrell looked like he had something to say, but Stephen didn't push him. "You can tell me when you're ready. As for my technique, I've already made my decision. I won't be handing it over." "In that case, I'll take my leave," Tyrell said respectfully. He left with the team. On their way to the car, Preston couldn't contain his curiosity. "Mr. Tyrell, is Mr. Adams—" He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he was going to ask. Tyrell was aware that they'd realized Stephen's identity. He couldn't hide it from them anymore, but he couldn't tell them directly either. Mr. Adams's identity is a national secret. His reply was clear confirmation. Preston's team had already come to that conclusion, but having their speculations confirmed gave them another shock. "I never expected the former commander to be him. That's why Mr. Sidney was so angry when he found out what we did. Do you think Mr. Adams will hold it against us?" "I don't think so. He seems open-minded." Tyrell gave them a warning look. "Mr. Adams' identity is top secret. Your authority is not high enough to gain access to that information, but you found out because of special circumstances. Keep it to yourself. If you let it slip, the Leviathan unit will make sure you're imprisoned for the rest of your life. Do you understand?" The team wisely kept their mouths shut. "Mr. Tyrell, what are you going to do now?" Preston asked. "I'm going home. Find a hotel and wait for me there." Preston nodded and left with the team. When Tyrell was alone, he let out a sigh. He had to find a way to protect Lana from Vindictus and fix the mess he'd caused. Stephen was deep in thought as he watched Tyrell and Preston's team walk away. His identity as the Sovereign had been exposed. Even if the enemy had doubts, it would only be a matter of time before they confirmed their suspicions. They'd also found out about his cultivation technique. That was why they'd given up on framing Tyrell and targeting his technique instead. They pressured the officials into getting him to hand it over, but he'd refused, which meant... As this thought crossed Stephen's mind, he quickly took out his phone and called Noor. He'd refused to give up his technique, so the only way to threaten him was to target the people around him. Noor didn't answer. Stephen cursed and called Wes, Aston, and Sorov. They didn't pick up either. A few minutes later, he received a call from an unknown number. Stephen steeled himself and answered the call. "Who are you?" A processed electronic voice came from the other line. "Stephen Adams, or rather, should I call you the Divine Sovereign?" "You're mistaken. I'm not the Sovereign." Stephen wasn't lying. He'd retired from his position. The person laughed. "I don't care if you're the Sovereign or not. I called to tell you one thing. Your daughter is in my hands." There was a pause, and then the sound of a little girl crying sounded from the phone. Stephen's eyes widened. He would recognize that voice anywhere. It was Valeria. "What do you want?" The little girl's cries disappeared. It was replaced by the electronic voice. "I want your cultivation technique. You'll know where to find me soon. Remember, come alone." Before Stephen could say anything, the call dropped, and he received a message. Noor appeared beside him in a flash of light and knelt on one knee. "I'm sorry, Mr. Adams. I failed." Stephen crouched down and placed a hand on his shoulder to steady him. Noor's face was pale, and blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The front of his dress shirt was torn, and there was a dent on his chest. His breaths were shallow and ragged. It looked like he was struggling to breathe. There weren't that many martial artists who could match up to the Northern Guardian. Who could have injured them to this extent? "Noor, who did this to you?" Noor's voice was strained. I don't know. Someone took Valeria. I chased after them, but two people got in my way. One of them was wearing a white horse mask, and the other was wearing a Buddha mask. They were only at the peak of the martial Grandmaster realm, but they used some kind of strange technique that increased their strength. I was caught off guard and took a heavy blow. They ran off while I was getting up, and... Noor clasped a hand over his mouth. He shook violently as a coughing fit tore through him. Blood leaked through his fingers and splattered on the ground. It left him breathless and gasping for air. Stephen placed his palm on Noor's injury and transferred his inner energy to speed up his recovery and alleviate the pain. "Head back and recover. Tell Wes, Aston, and Sorav to find Valeria's location." Noor clutched his chest and took a deep, shaky breath. "Understood." He vanished in a scatter of light. Stephen pulled out his phone to check the messages from the culprit. A back alley had been circled on the map. Whoever had targeted his family and his people, he wouldn't let them get away with it. Stephen's phone rang just as he was about to leave the villa. Kim was calling. He answered the call, but before he could say anything, her anxious voice came from the other line. "Stephen, Valeria was kidnapped. Whoever took her called me and said our daughter was in their hands. I also heard Valeria crying." Stephen clenched his fists. "Kim, where are you?" Valeria had been kidnapped, and the palace was searching for her. The most important thing right now was to ensure Kim's safety. The enemy was after his cultivation technique, so they wouldn't do anything to Valeria before getting it. With the palace's network, they'd be able to find the culprit's location within 2 hours. He would track them down and get Valeria back. "I'm on my way to the Cassidy family's house," Kim said. "I'm going to ask Grandpa if he can help." "Okay, I'll be right there." Stephen hung up and rushed out of the house. At the Cassidy family's residence, DeAndre and Helen were sitting at the head of the table. The rest of the family were gathered around them. Kim hurried into the hall, attracting the family's attention. "Look who it is," Rebecca said sarcastically. "Isn't it Kim, who's always too busy to visit? Why are you here? Did you think it through and decide to give up the Wyvern Group?" "You're too busy taking care of that useless husband of yours," Harry mocked. "If you keep this up, your two companies will go under. Why don't you just hand them over to your family? We can manage them in your stead." Kim gave them an impatient look. "I don't have time to argue with you. If you don't be quiet, then I'll make you shut up." Rebecca and Harry were at a loss for words. She'd never openly threatened them so aggressively before. They couldn't risk offending her in front of DeAndre. DeAndre put an end to the argument. "That's enough. Kim, what's the matter?" "Grandpa, Valeria was kidnapped. You have to help her," Kim pleaded. "Who did it?" DeAndre demanded. "Who's provoking our family? Aren't they afraid of our connection to the Fallon family?" "I don't know. They called me and told me they wanted Stephen to meet them at a back alley alone. They sent me the location." When Kim had called Stephen earlier, she hadn't told him this information. He used to be the commander, but after recovering from his disability, she didn't know if his martial arts had also recovered. Going to the back alley alone would be dangerous. DeAndre was supporting the Cassidy family, so he could ask the Fallon family to help him. "There has to be a mistake. Why would they want that good for nothing?" Helen asked. "Stephen's not the commander anymore," Harry added. "He's like you and me, an ordinary person." "In my opinion, it's not him they want," Rebecca said. "They're trying to use him to cheat us out of our family's property." "Watch your words," Kim warned. "Be quiet," DeAndre shouted, scanning the crowd in disapproval. "No matter what, Kim is a member of our family. Valeria is her daughter, which makes her one of us. Our family is in trouble, but you're wasting time and making sarcastic remarks. What is the meaning of this?" Harry and Rebecca averted their gaze. There was resentment in their expression. They couldn't understand why DeAndre favored Kim so much. The rest of the family's younger generation was thinking the same thing. Tension filled the hall. Helen calmly leaned back in her seat. DeAndre was her husband, and he was the head of the family, so he had the authority to reprimand them. DeAndre ignored the Cassidy family and looked at Kim. "Tell me the details. I need to know what's going on." Kim gave him a rundown of the call she'd had with the kidnapper. DeAndre frowned as he thought about it. He couldn't figure out who would be so bold as to kidnap Kim's daughter. "It doesn't matter who the culprit is. The Fallon family will definitely be able to save your daughter." He got up and headed for the door, motioning for Kim to follow him. "I'm going to the Fallon family's house. Kim, come with me." Before they could leave, a voice sounded from the entrance. "It's useless." The doors opened, and Stephen walked into the main hall. Harry and Rebecca shared a look. Why was he here? A trace of hostility crossed DeAndre's face. "Stephen, what are you doing here?" Ever since DeAndre heard that Stephen had abandoned his wife, daughter, and mother for Sylvie, he'd never had a good impression of him. But Kim was infatuated with him, so he'd reluctantly let him be. Despite how disloyal Stephen was, DeAndre never expected him to stop the Cassidy family at this crucial moment. "Move aside," DeAndre said impatiently. "Your daughter has been kidnapped. There's no time to lose." Stephen didn't move. He met DeAndre's piercing gaze. "It's useless even if you ask for help. I'll go." The Cassidy family snickered. "Did you hear that? He says he'll go. Who does he think he is?" "It looks like Rebecca was right. He's putting on an act to cheat our family out of our money." "He's the former commander, but his era is over." Their ridicule filled the hall, overtaking the tense atmosphere. Stephen didn't care about their criticisms. They were ordinary people who didn't understand the gravity of the situation, and he couldn't be bothered to explain it to them. DeAndre's eyes narrowed. "Say that again." "It's useless even if you ask the Fallon family for help," Stephen repeated. "I'll go." Kim hurried up to him and pulled him to the side. "Our daughter's life is at stake, and you'll be in danger if you go alone. Let Grandpa get someone to help." Stephen was exasperated. He knew that DeAndre's efforts would be in vain. The culprit wanted his cultivation technique, not the Cassidy family's fortune. And it didn't matter who they found to track Valeria down. If even Noor couldn't take them down, no one from the Fallon family would be able to go against them. "Why is it so noisy in here?" The doors opened once more, and Tyrell walked in. The Cassidy family looked over. They were puzzled when he just stood there after taking a few steps into the house. "Tyrell, you're here," DeAndre exclaimed. "Perfect timing. I need your help." Tyrell didn't respond, nor did he look at him. His attention was drawn to the corner of the hall. In terms of status, Tyrell outranked DeAndre by a mile because he was a member of the Empyrean Circle. In the Fallon family, he was the next strongest martial artist after Dale. DeAndre was Tyrell's relative, but there wasn't much he could do even though he was being ignored. He called Tyrell's name softly to get his attention. Tyrell came back to his senses and looked away from the corner. "What is it?" After separating from Preston's team, Tyrell had gone to the Fallon family's residence to check on Lana. While they were talking, he heard the Cassidy family's commotion. The Fallon and Cassidy family's residences weren't that far away from each other, and a martial artist at Tyrell's level could hear the rustling of trees and the buzz of insects within a 300-yard radius. The sound of the Cassidy family's quarrel was as loud as if they were quarreling right in front of him. Tyrell had been feeling guilty ever since he fell into Odin's trap and revealed Stephen's identity. In addition, Lana could be in danger at any time. He had a lot on his mind, but he couldn't even wallow in his guilt in peace with the Cassidy family's argument echoing in his ears. Therefore, Tyrell had stormed out of the Fallon family's house to pay the Cassidy family a visit and tell them to quiet down. But before he could tell them off, he was stunned to see his teacher being humiliated by these ordinary people. While Tyrell was recovering from his shock, Stephen subtly gestured for him not to reveal his identity. Tyrell understood and swallowed his greeting. DeAndre and the Cassidy family didn't notice their silent exchange. Kim, however, was suspicious. This was the third time they'd run into Tyrell. The last time he came to their house, Stephen had brushed off his visit, acting like it wasn't a big deal. But Kim could tell it wasn't that simple. Kim's daughter, Valeria, was kidnapped, DeAndre explained. They left a message for Stephen, asking him to meet at the back alley, but there's nothing he can do even if he went, so I was planning to ask the Fallon family for assistance. As you can see, Stephen was trying to get in the way. The Cassidy family backed him up. Stephen's trying to stop us from saving Valeria. I think he doesn't care about his daughter. He just wants the Cassidy family's assets. How could someone like him be a father? Tyrell could hardly believe what he was seeing. These people didn't know who they were messing with. That was the sovereign they were mocking. Tyrell could not tolerate this disrespect toward his teacher. That's enough. Stop yelling. You're being too nosy. The Cassidy family was surprised by his outburst, but they didn't suspect anything. They thought Tyrell was annoyed because they were making a scene. Tyrell was frustrated with the Cassidy family for treating Stephen like this, but he pretended to be calm. I'll head out and find Valeria. As he spoke to DeAndre, he cast a subtle glance at his teacher. Stephen shook his head. Their target is me. I'll go. As a member of the Empyrean Circle, Tyrell was quick on the uptake. He understood what his teacher was trying to tell him. If the culprit was targeting Stephen, that could only mean that they were after his cultivation technique. DeAndre was out of the loop, and Stephen's words angered him. Why are you wasting our time? What can you do? Are you going to rely on your so-called status as a former commander? You know who Tyrell is. He's more capable than you. Tyrell stared at his uncle incredulously. Why was DeAndre bringing up his position in front of Stephen? That was indirectly humiliating him. Stephen was the sovereign, and the Empyrean Circle were his subordinates. They were nowhere near the same level. Tyrell was annoyed, but because DeAndre was the grandfather of Stephen's wife, he couldn't talk back to him. The Cassidy family didn't know what Tyrell was thinking. Instead, they were hung up on the fact that a member of the Empyrean Circle was standing in their own home. Tyrell rarely visited them. Now that he was here, they had an opportunity to try and win his favor. In an instant, the Cassidy family changed their attitudes and directed words of flattery towards Tyrell. Tyrell, you're so young and talented. You're completely different from that good-for-nothing. Harry and Rebecca joined in. If they could get on Tyrell's good side, Kim's status in the family wouldn't matter anymore. She wasn't worth mentioning when Tyrell was in the picture. Harry shoved a contract into Tyrell's face. I was thinking of starting my own business. Would you be interested in investing? Rebecca linked arms with Tyrell. Forget about them. Look at my contract. Tyrell looked at his teacher for help. These people were relatives of Stephen's wife. He needed permission to be rough with them. Stephen gave him a subtle nod. With his approval, Tyrell didn't hesitate to shove Rebecca's arm off him and wave Harry's contract away from his face. Stop getting in my way. The Cassidy family, who'd been crowding around him, was startled when he raised his voice. It scared them away. Is this what the #1 family in the country is like? Do you think your behavior is appropriate? I'm part of the Empyrean Circle. It's my duty to help the people. I'll go find Valeria. Before Tyrell could walk out, Stephen called him back. Wait, you don't need to get involved. I'll go. Tyrell stopped in his tracks. He'd gotten caught up in the moment, and he'd forgotten that Stephen had wanted to take care of this himself. That's enough, Stephen, DeAndre yelled. Get out of our house. There's no place for you here, Helen said. The family grabbed the brooms from the closet and kicked Stephen out. Kim tried to stop them, but she was pushed back by the large crowd. Tyrell stepped out of the house a moment later. He greeted Stephen politely. Are you upset because of the Cassidy family? They're an ignorant, ordinary family, Stephen replied. Why would I be upset? Who's behind this? Are they from Warhawk? Tyrell hesitated before answering. They're from Vindictus. The leader, Odin, planned this scheme. I see. I had my suspicions. Are you really going to go alone? Tyrell asked in concern. Won't it be dangerous? I'll go with you. There's no need for that. I'll head to the back alley by myself and get rid of them. They attacked my family and my people. I won't let them off so easily. There was a dangerous glint in Stephen's eyes that intimidated Tyrell. He knew how angry his teacher was. He stepped back and didn't insist on tagging along. With that, Stephen headed to the back alley alone. While he was at the Cassidy family's residence, the palace had found the exact location of the culprit and their information. At the same time, Tyrell went to the back alley from another route and waited on the roof of a tall building in the neighborhood. Stephen had told him not to follow him, but he'd already promised the Cassidy family, so he at least had to check on the situation. The message that Kim received hadn't specified exactly where the meeting would take place, but with Stephen's strength, mass destruction would follow if a fight broke out. Tyrell would know his location immediately. It was his fault Stephen's identity had been revealed, and Vindictus was targeting his daughter. He would do his best to make it up to him. At an inconspicuous underground shop near the back alley, Odin was keeping tabs on Stephen's whereabouts through a monitor. He's here. Reeve, Blaine, I'll leave this to you. Yes, sir, they responded in unison. Behind them were members of Vindictus's hidden division. They were martial artists who'd practiced the dark arts. They'd taken a drug that improved their cultivation, and their strength was on par with a Grand Master. They would be assisting Reeve and Blaine. Odin was confident that his plan was foolproof. Attack the Sovereign immediately when you see him. Success is the only option. Failure will not be tolerated. Do you understand? Understood, they replied. Go. With Odin's command, Reeve and Blaine disappeared from where they stood. The members of the hidden division filed out of the room in an organized manner. Boss, what about her? Luther asked, gesturing to the little girl in his arms. A cloth had been stuffed into her mouth, and her arms were tied behind her back. Her beautiful dress had been stained with dirt. Odin waved for him to leave. The Sovereign's already here. She's of no use to us now. Valeria struggled in her captive's arms. Luther grabbed her neck and held her in place. Stop moving around. Odin glanced back at them. Wait, I have a better idea. Leave her here just in case. Luther placed Valeria on the floor next to Odin. Valeria shrank back in fear. She was young, but she had a general understanding of what was going on from their conversation. They wanted to use her to threaten her daddy. When Stephen reached the back alley that had been marked in the message he'd received, the bystanders turned to stare at him. This neighborhood was famous for being a popular hangout spot for Washington, D.C.'s underworld. The people here lived in the shadows outside the law. They would never provoke the government because they weren't strong enough for that, but ordinary people made it a point to stay far away as they could from the area. Offending anyone in this neighborhood would risk ruining their chances of a bright future. The hoodlums in the area were cautious towards outsiders. A youth with dyed blonde hair smoking a cigarette called out to Stephen when he passed by. Hey kid, where did you come from? Stephen was worried about his daughter and couldn't be bothered with him. He was using his aura to sense Valeria's presence. The palace had already tracked down the exact location of her kidnapper, but he would be more at ease if he confirmed her presence in the neighborhood personally. When Stephen didn't reply, the youth took a drag of his cigarette before throwing it on the ground. You, brat, I'm asking you a question. Don't pretend to be mute. His underlings surrounded Stephen. They were eager to beat someone up. It wasn't every day they came across an outsider brazenly walking around the neighborhood. Stephen glanced at them. I suggest you leave this place as soon as possible. The youth and his underlings looked at each other before looking back at Stephen like there was something wrong with his brain. They had no intention of leaving, but Stephen didn't care. He ignored them and turned to his left. He sensed a presence rapidly approaching and knew that his whereabouts had been exposed. This was within his expectations. The enemy knew his identity and kidnapped Valeria. It made sense for them to monitor his movements, but he was a little surprised that his location had been exposed so quickly. Since Stephen had been exposed, he decided to kill his way in. A man wearing a white horse mask emerged from the darkness. He applauded Stephen. As expected of the Sovereign, you noticed me before I arrived. Stephen studied the man in the mask. He could sense a dark energy inside him. The man was only at the peak of the martial grandmaster realm, but he could probably defeat another martial artist in the same realm within a few moves. A white horse mask. You're the one who did that to Noor. There should be two of you. Where's your partner? Who's Noor? Reeve asked in confusion. Oh, that bodyguard? I remember him. We got him pretty good. He almost passed out from one blow to the chest. Is everyone who works for you that incompetent? A dark look crossed Stephen's face. What you did to Noor, I'll do the same to you. Reeve laughed. Be patient. My partner Blaine will be here soon. As he spoke, his eyes turned maniacal. I've been waiting to fight the Sovereign. Just thinking about it gets me excited. Why not play with me first? Reeve shifted into an offensive stance, and a dark aura flooded the alley. A member of Vindictus's hidden division stepped forward and stopped him. Mr. Reeve, you can't. Reeve shot him a glare. Why are you stopping me? The team member wasn't afraid and met his gaze. That was the boss's order. Upon hearing that, Reeve became listless, and the fight drained out of him. Fine, I'll wait. The youth with the blonde hair from earlier and his underlings were still around. They were having a hard time keeping up with their conversation. What Sovereign? Are you talking about him? Stop messing around. This is my territory. Get out of here. Reeve glanced at the youth in annoyance. He lifted his hand and drew a cross in the air. The youth, who'd been alive and kicking just seconds before, was dismembered. His limbs scattered on the pavement, and blood sprayed the walls. His underlings were momentarily stunned, but then they started screaming and ran for their lives. Reeve lifted his hand again, targeting one of the underlings. Stephen kicked a stone between Reeve and the underling. A dark light flashed. The stone sliced into pieces while the underling was unharmed. Reeve was impressed. You saw through my skill after one use. I'd expect nothing less from the Sovereign. What's so impressive about that? Stephen asked. You infused your energy into a thread. It's a simple trick. The underlings dropped to a crouch and crawled to Stephen's side. Mr. Sovereign, we were blind and didn't recognize you. This is our boss's fault. We didn't want to offend you. Please save us. Stephen ignored them and walked past them. Where's Valeria? Hand her over. Valeria? Reeve tilted his head and thought about it. Oh, that little girl. Is that your daughter's name? Hand her over, Stephen repeated. Another man emerged from the darkness. He was wearing a Buddha mask, and a beaded necklace hung around his neck. Unfortunately, you won't be seeing your daughter again. You're going to die here. You two aren't enough to kill me. Reeve and Blaine's eyes shone with excitement. How would you know if we never tried? If you want to die so badly, then be my guest. Stephen released his aura, sending a shockwave of energy through the narrow alley. Cracks spread on the pavement beneath his feet. He closed the distance between them in a flash of light and swung his fist at Reeve. Reeve and Blaine were startled by Stephen's explosive momentum and quickly threw out their palms to defend. When their attacks collided, a rush of wind swept through the alley. Reeve and Blaine leaped backward, skidding to a stop 20 feet away. Stephen was surprised that they'd taken his attack directly. He hadn't used any special skills, but he hadn't held back either. With his cultivation base, he could have killed any martial grandmaster with a single punch. He suspected that would have been the outcome if they hadn't joined forces. When they worked together, their strength and defense increased significantly, and they barely managed to survive his attack. They must have attacked Noor together, because they knew they couldn't defeat him on their own. Blood flowed from Reeve's nose and mouth. His hair was disheveled, and there were cracks on his mask. That was close. One punch from him almost knocked the two of us over. Blaine's clothes were tattered, and his necklace had snapped. The beads rolled on the ground. We underestimated him. He lives up to his reputation. Hand Valeria over, and I'll give you a quick death, Stephen said. Noor was the strongest among the 5 guardians of the palace. If he couldn't take them down when they joined forces, it would be all too easy for them to target his family and his people again in the future. It would be better to get rid of them here. The two of them didn't give in. "That's not happening," Reeves said. Blaine ordered the members of the Hidden Division to gather together. The group came up behind them. Reeve, Blaine, and their subordinates placed a talisman on their chest. A thick, oppressive energy filled the air. Stephen could sense their strength increasing exponentially. Their auras weaved together, as if they were one being. When Reeve spoke, his voice was a combination of his and Blaine's. "We are 10 times stronger than before." Blaine's voice was similarly distorted. 10 times, 15 times, 150 times. Stephen had never seen anything like it, even though he possessed knowledge about the palace and the aristocrats. This was most likely the strange technique Nora had told him about. The distorted voice continued. "Will you still be a match for us when we're 150 times stronger than before?" Reeve and Blaine moved at the same time. They were like twins. They had a tacit understanding of each other, like their minds were connected. Their movements were exactly the same. They struck out with their palms at the same time. Stephen faced their attacks head-on with his fist. An explosion erupted, and a small building in the vicinity collapsed. Tyrell, who'd been waiting on the rooftop nearby, sensed the disturbance and stood up. He leaped into the air, heading straight for the destroyed building. The residents of the neighborhood felt the ground shake. Those who were closer to the scene were knocked over from the impact. Stephen could feel Reeve and Blaine's strength the moment they exchanged blows. They were as strong as Vito back when he was alive. Stephen reached the immortal realm, but even he would need time to take them down. He took a few steps back, contemplating his next course of action. This was turning out to be more troublesome than he'd thought. He was planning on getting rid of them in one move, but their technique had dragged out the battle. Stephen was rarely anxious, but he was in a rush to get Valeria. She was waiting for him to save her. Reeve and Blaine were also not expecting this outcome. Their technique had increased their strength significantly, but Stephen wasn't affected. The entire plan had been ruined. Odin stared at the monitor in disbelief. He tightened his grip and shattered the wooden handrail. He couldn't understand how Stephen was so strong. His strength had far exceeded his expectations. Odin thought he'd accounted for everything to the point where he was questioning if he was overestimating the Sovereign's strength. He'd sent out Vindictus's hidden division and given them talismans. Their formation should have been strong enough to rival Vito. According to his intel, the Sovereign had a destructive battle with Vito a year ago, and he barely managed to win. What Odin didn't know was that Stephen's unique cultivation technique had made him much stronger after that first battle with Vito. If he had known, he wouldn't have devised this plan. The situation was not looking good. Odin had been planning to kill the Sovereign. Their accomplishment would have brought Vindictus to fame and would have naturally attracted many others to join their organization. The U.S. would have lost their largest support, and their national strength would have declined. His plan was perfect, but reality had proved him wrong. Compared to her anxious captive, Valeria's fear was washed away when she saw Stephen on the screen. Her daddy would be coming to save her soon. Odin sensed a change in the room and looked back. He saw Valeria hiding in the corner. His eyes lit up. He was so shocked by Stephen's strength that he'd forgotten that he had his daughter in his grasp. Odin had been confident in Reeve, Blaine, and the Hidden Division, but he'd asked Luther to leave Valeria behind as a precaution in case they were on par with the Sovereign and couldn't defeat him. Now it was glaringly obvious that the Sovereign had an overwhelming advantage over them. Odin was glad he had the foresight to keep Valeria around. There was still room for negotiation. He went to the corner and picked her up. Valeria was just beginning to relax, but her tension returned when she was in her captive's arms again. She tried to struggle, but she couldn't get out of his tight hold. Odin stared down at Valeria with a smile that frightened her. "Be quiet. We are going to see your father." He picked up the communication device. "Luther, after you finish setting up, retreat immediately." After giving his order, he crushed the device and walked out the door, heading in the direction of the destruction. At the center of the battle, the surrounding buildings had all but collapsed. Broken tiles, rubble, and debris had been swept into a raging storm. Reeve and Blaine were still standing, but barely. Stephen's martial arts were insane. They didn't come close to his level. "How can a martial artist like you exist?" Reeve demanded. Stephen dusted his hands. "Cultivating the dark arts, going berserk, only to ultimately be outplayed. Truly a spectacle. Hand Valeria over." Reeve and Blaine didn't respond. They were almost at their limit. They didn't want to waste their energy on useless chatter. Stephen could tell that they were at the end of their rope. He dashed forward and slammed his fist into Reeve's chest. Without losing any momentum, he spun on his heel and landed a kick on Blaine's torso. The two of them were sent flying back. The members of the Hidden Division collapsed at the same time the two of them were defeated. They fell to the ground like kites with broken strings. Stephen put his hands in his pockets, peering down at Reeve and Blaine's prone form. "Where is your hideout?" "If you tell me, I'll make your death quick." Reeve scoffed. "I admit you're stronger than us, but you won't get anything out of me. You can kill me or cut me up. Do your worst." Blaine opted to stay quiet. "It looks like the two of you aren't going to talk. Then this is the end." Stephen held out his hand. His inner energy sharpened at the fingertips. His makeshift blade was deadlier than a real sword. He slashed towards Reeve's neck. Right after he made contact, a voice rang out. "Stop! Keep him alive!" Stephen paused and turned in the direction of the voice. A man in a suit and leather shoes was carrying a little girl in his arms. He was pointing a gun at her head. Stephen's eyes narrowed. "You're Odin, aren't you? Put the gun down and let her go. Then I'll give you a swift death." Odin chuckled. "I really didn't expect the former commander to turn out to be the sovereign." Stephen's tone was casual, while Odin's was friendly. If one ignored the destruction around him, they would seem like old friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. However, aside from the fact that they were anything but friends, it wasn't too far from the truth. In the past, they'd had several conflicts with one another. They were longtime enemies, but this was their first meeting. "Let Valeria go, and I'll give you a quick death," Stephen repeated. Odin shook his head. His grip on the gun was steady, and his finger was resting on the trigger. "Give us your cultivation technique and let us leave. After we're at a safe distance away, I'll leave your daughter behind. That's the only way you can save her." "The only way, you say? Think again." Odin was bewildered by Stephen's threat. Did he really have a way to save his daughter when she had a gun pointed at her head? No, that had to be impossible. Stephen's martial arts were profound, but his daughter was an ordinary little girl. He couldn't possibly save her in time. Odin's expression didn't change. "Let's make a deal. Let us go and I'll give you your daughter. You might not be afraid of bullets, but your daughter is a normal child. You won't be able to save her if I shoot. If you want to guarantee her safety, then do as I say." Stephen leveled him with an impassive look. "I'm not letting you leave." Odin grew nervous when his threats didn't work. This was the first meeting with Stephen, but from everything he'd heard about him in the past, he could tell what kind of person he was. He was protective of his family and his people. Odin was confident that he would never give up on his daughter, but from how their conversation was unfolding, the situation was heading in that direction. Reeve and Blaine were important contributors to Vindictus's combat force. They couldn't afford to lose them here. "Stephen, don't force my hand. You'd better tread carefully. You're playing with your daughter's life." "You're not capable enough to threaten me. Don't even think about leaving this place today." "Who knew the Sovereign could be so cold-blooded?" Odin asked sarcastically. "He doesn't even care about his own daughter's life. I admit I've been outplayed. Make your move. I'll take your daughter with me. We'll go to hell together." Stephen didn't respond and looked at Valeria instead. "Valeria, don't be afraid. Trust me, Daddy will save you soon." Valeria was shaking with fear, but she calmed down when she heard his reassuring words. A cloth had been stuffed in her mouth, so she couldn't speak, but Stephen could see her trust in him from the look in her eyes. Odin laughed loudly. Do you really think you can save your daughter from a gun just because you're the sovereign? I'll shoot the moment you take one step toward us. She'll be dead before you get her. Stephen ignored him and held out his hand. Odin tensed. He thought Stephen was just talking big. He didn't think he would actually try anything. Do you really not care about your daughter? Stephen was as calm as ever. I told you, you can't hurt her. His insanity was beyond Odin's expectations. Don't blame me for what happens next. You forced me. Odin adjusted his grip on the gun and pressed the trigger. Stephen narrowed his eyes, zeroing in on Odin's right index finger. Before the gun could be fired, Stephen flicked his hand, condensing a sharp wave of inner energy. It shot through the air and severed Odin's hand from his wrist. He cried out in pain and dropped the gun as blood stained his mask. In the time it took for Odin's severed hand and his gun to land on the ground, Stephen had already closed the distance between them. He grabbed Valeria and sent Odin flying back with a kick. Stephen didn't pay any more attention to Odin. He gently removed the cloth from Valeria's mouth and untied the rope. Are you okay, Valeria? I'm sorry I was late. Anger welled up inside him when he saw the dirt on her face and the stains on her clothes. No matter how smart Valeria was, she was still a child. Being kidnapped was a traumatizing experience. She threw her arms around his neck. Daddy, I was so scared. Stephen patted her back. Don't be afraid. I'm here. I won't let any of these bad people hurt you. He turned to look at Odin, who was lying on the ground. Get up. I know you're not dead. The moment Stephen came in contact with Odin, he felt a force that reduced most of the impact. He'd put most of his strength into his attack, and it looked like Odin had taken a heavy blow, but in reality, it hadn't caused much damage. Odin staggered to his feet, holding his injured arm. Blood dripped onto the pavement. Stephen, I won't forget this. I've lost this round, but I'll be the one teaching you a lesson next time. Stephen wasn't fazed. He'd encountered thousands of opponents who lost their minds after being defeated and resorted to verbal threats. There won't be a next time. You're going to die here today. Don't force me. A life and death struggle isn't beneficial to anyone. Let me leave. Stephen secured his hold on Valeria and circulated his inner energy. He vanished and reappeared in front of Odin, landing another kick on his abdomen. He felt the strange force from earlier. Odin was knocked back, but he wasn't injured. He seemed to have returned to a calm state of mind. You can't kill me. Stephen decided to materialize his inner energy instead of attacking directly. The force surrounding Odin hadn't appeared when his wrist was severed. You're wasting your time, Odin said. You can't do anything to me. True to his word, when Stephen's energy reached him, the force around him rippled and absorbed the impact. Stephen couldn't figure out what the strange force was. What is that? Odin didn't answer him. He looked up at the sky. It's about time. As his voice faded, a sudden explosion shook the pavement beneath Stephen's feet. Half of the street was overturned and ravaged by flames. Stephen wouldn't be affected by the explosion, but the same couldn't be said about Valeria. He formed a protective barrier around them using his energy. While he was distracted, Odin grabbed Reeve and Blaine, preparing to take off. Don't even think about leaving! Just as Stephen was about to chase after them, another explosion shook the ground. He cursed when he was forced to watch them run. Because of how much had taken place during the battle, it seemed longer than it actually was. Less than 5 minutes had passed since Tyrell noticed Stephen's location. When he had arrived at the scene, he saw Stephen shielding his daughter from the ongoing explosions. Tyrell walked up to them. Mr. Adams, are you and your daughter all right? Stephen was glad to see him. You came at the perfect time. Take my daughter and leave. I'll go after them. Without waiting for a reply, he handed him the little girl in his arms. Tyrell was surprised that someone like Stephen, who had had years of experience in profound martial arts, hadn't been able to finish off Vindictus in one battle. This proved that their organization was cunning and dangerous. Tyrell's mind was racing as he processed the situation, but he didn't just stand there. He took Valeria and held her protectively in his arms. Do you need help, Mr. Adams? No, I haven't been investigating them for a while,
so I didn't expect them to set up a trap for me. They're skilled. They have a strange formation at their disposal. With your cultivation base, you can't handle them. Protect Valeria. Bring her back to Kim."
"Understood," Tyrell said. Stephen gently wiped the dirt from Valeria's face with his sleeve.
"This is Daddy's friend. He'll bring you home."
Valeria clutched his sleeve.
"When are you coming back?"
Stephen smiled and patted her head. He held out his pinky.
"Daddy will be back soon. I promise."
Valeria linked her pinky with his.
"I'll be waiting for you."
Stephen patted Tyrell's shoulder and disappeared down the street in a ray of light. Tyrell carried Valeria out of the neighborhood. She was quiet on the way back. Tyrell racked his brain and tried to come up with some comforting words, but he couldn't bring himself to say them out loud. He was the reason Valeria had been kidnapped. This was all because he'd fallen into Vindictus's trap and revealed Stephen's identity as the Sovereign. Neither of them said a word as they returned to the Cassidy family's residence. A few sharp-eyed family members had spotted Tyrell from a distance and ran back into the house to notify everyone else. DeAndre stood up and led the family outside to welcome them back. He was relieved to see Tyrell walk through the gate with Valeria in his arms. Kim took Valeria from him and looked her over for any signs of injury. The rest of the family surrounded him and showered him with compliments. "Mr. Tyrell is worthy of being part of the Empyrean Circle. He's smart and capable. He saved Kim's daughter in no time at all." "I know, right? He's swift and decisive. It's only been an hour. With him on our side, there's nothing to be afraid of." Kim was relieved to see that Valeria wasn't hurt. "Thank you so much for saving my daughter and bringing her home." Tyrell had been confused when the Cassidy family praised him. He hadn't done much except wait near the back alley, meet up with Stephen when the battle was over, and bring his daughter home. He had no idea what they were complimenting him for, but he realized their misunderstanding when Kim thanked him for saving her daughter. He'd been so lost in his own thoughts on the way back that he hadn't realized that showing up with Valeria would make them think that he saved her. More importantly, Kim looked ready to lower her head and thank him a second time. If Stephen found out his wife was lowering her head to his student, he might decide to end their teacher and student relationship right then and there. Tyrell hurriedly stopped her. "There's no need for that, Miss Kim. I was only doing my duty."
"Speaking of which, where's Stephen?" DeAndre asked. "Tyrell's back with Valeria. Why is he hiding? He's a disgrace to our family."
The Cassidy family looked around, and when Stephen was nowhere in sight, they began to criticize him. "He's a hypocrite. He insisted that we didn't need help from the Fallon family and said he would go, but Mr. Tyrell handled everything for him. He's probably too ashamed to show his face after seeing how easy it was for Mr. Tyrell to rescue Valeria." Harry and Rebecca exchanged a glance. They had been waiting for Tyrell to come back with Valeria so they could make a fuss and persuade Kim to hand over her company shares. Harry steered the conversation in their favor. "Kim, why aren't you saying anything? Don't you want to hear Stephen explain himself?"
"What's there to explain?" Rebecca asked. "If you ask me, he's too afraid to tell the truth. He thinks he's all that just because he used to be the commander. He's delusional."
Her insults deepened the family's disgust toward Stephen. Kim was annoyed by their ridicule, but conversations like these had happened too many times to count in the past. She knew how drawn out it could be. Comforting Valeria was more important at the moment.
"When he comes back, I'll give him a piece of my mind," Helen declared.
Harry knew this was his chance. He whispered, "Grandma, Stephen probably won't be back for some time. Valeria was just kidnapped, and Kim doesn't have the energy to manage the company properly. We can't let her business be ruined. Why don't we send someone from our family to help her manage it?"
"Good idea," Helen agreed. "I'll ask him to hand over her company's management rights later."
Valeria had calmed down on her way home, and she felt safe and secure now that she was in her mother's arms. She couldn't understand why the family was insulting her father.
"It was Daddy who saved me."
Her voice wasn't loud, but her words were exceptionally clear. Everyone heard what she had said.
"What are you talking about?" Helen demanded. "Kim, what are you teaching her? She doesn't even know who her benefactor is."
Before Kim could argue, Valeria interrupted her and repeated herself.
"Daddy saved me."
She was insistent, and the family began to have doubts. Could it really have been Stephen who rescued Valeria from her kidnapper? Harry and Rebecca looked at each other. The family was being swayed. If this continued, they wouldn't be able to make Kim hand over her business, because if Stephen really did rescue Valeria, that proved he was more capable than he seemed. Harry interjected. How's that possible? Everyone knows Stephen can't fight as well as he used to. How could he have saved Valeria?
Exactly, Rebecca said. We all know what kind of person he is. He likes to brag, but has nothing to show for it. We can't trust the words of a child. She must have been so scared when she was kidnapped that she couldn't accurately discern Mr. Tyrell's face and instinctively thought it was her father. The family's doubts were dispelled, and their disgust toward Stephen rose to another level. They believed Rebecca's explanation. I wonder why Stephen still isn't here. Did he think he could hide the truth from our family? He's detestable. It's thanks to Rebecca that we saw through his scheme. Stephen is getting worse as the days pass, DeAndre said disapprovingly. He turned to Tyrell. I'll make sure to teach him a lesson. I'll let you know when he's back. Tyrell felt awkward. While he was thinking about how to explain that he wasn't the one who saved Valeria, the conversation had taken another turn, and the family was even more convinced that Stephen had done nothing to rescue his daughter. If he clarified that Stephen had saved her on his own, the family would no doubt ask him questions. He would risk exposing Stephen's identity to outsiders again. Once was bad enough. He couldn't let it happen a second time. Tyrell wondered what Stephen was doing right now. He'd most likely caught up to Odin already. Odin would probably try to get Stephen to spare him by revealing the private conversation they had at the hotel. Tyrell didn't know how Stephen would react when he found out that his student had sold him out. But he knew it was his fault, and he would take responsibility for his actions. When the Cassidy family continued to criticize Stephen, Valeria turned to Kim and pouted. Mommy, why don't they believe me? Daddy saved me.
Kim didn't know how Stephen had done it, but she believed in him and their daughter. Mommy knows you're telling the truth. They just don't like Daddy.
Why not? I don't like them.
Kim carried Valeria inside the house and left the family to bicker by themselves outside. You'll understand when you grow up. After Tyrell left with Valeria, Stephen followed the path and chased after Odin. Vindictus had a head start, but Stephen was fast, and it didn't take him long to catch up to them. He chased them down to the other side of the neighborhood and arrived just in time to see Odin helping Reeve and Blaine into the back seat of a sports car. Odin sensed Stephen's presence behind him and slammed the door shut. He went around and quickly got into the passenger seat. He shouted at Luther, who was behind the wheel. Let's go! Luther didn't hesitate. He stepped on the accelerator and sped down the road. Stephen took out his phone and made a call as he ran after them. He informed the person on the other line of his location and instructed them to intercept a black sports car. Then he hung up and focused on giving chase. After reaching the 11th level of his cultivation technique, his stamina increased. He could chase after their car on foot without experiencing any signs of fatigue. Luther peered at the side view mirror and saw Stephen following closely behind. He stepped on the accelerator, but the car had reached its limit. This was as fast as they could go. Stephen was rapidly approaching, and he was much faster than a sports car. Boss, what should we do? He'll catch up to us in 5 minutes. Stop talking, Odin yelled. Focus on driving. He looked back at his two subordinates. Number 1 and number 2, you know what to do. The rear window shattered, and 2 masked men in black leaped out of the car and rushed towards Stephen. With their strength, they had no chance of winning. Their goal was to sacrifice themselves to buy time for Odin to escape. A black light swirled around them, and in the next moment, their inner energy surged. They stretched out their hands and lunged for Stephen like a moth to a flame, but he didn't dodge or slow down. Odin's subordinates thought he was too confident for his own good. No one could take their combined attacks head on. Maybe they had a chance to stop him after all. They increased their strength to the limit and collided with Stephen. A huge explosion rocked the intersection. The air vibrated and the pavement cracked. Odin turned around and froze. A rain of blood and flesh fell from the sky.
His 2 subordinates had been killed upon impact and turned into a pool of blood. Stephen had slightly slowed down to deal with them, but he resumed his chase right after. He hadn't lost any momentum. The 2 subordinates hadn't been able to hold him up for even a second. Odin cursed under his breath. He'd spent so much effort to train those subordinates into loyal, killing machines. They had both been at the Martial Grandmaster realm, but even after they attacked Stephen together, they still hadn't managed to slow him down. Stephen's martial arts were terrifying and out of this world. How long until we reached the airport? Luther was sweating profusely as he drove as fast as he could. About 5 minutes. Okay. Odin glanced at the back seat. Reeve, Blaine, there are firearms and bombs in the car. Stop him with that. Reeve and Blaine had been heavily injured from their fight with Stephen, but enough time had passed for them to regain their bearings. They were at the peak of the Martial Grandmaster realm. Although they hadn't recovered, injuries couldn't keep them down for long unless they were fatal. A trace of fear flickered in Reeve's eyes. The Sovereign is insane. He pulled out a gun from under the seat and leaned out the window to shoot at Stephen. Yeah, we almost died. Blaine took out his gun and shot at Stephen from the other window. Stephen was mildly amused that Reeve and Blaine had given up on their dark arts and resorted to typical firearms. When the bullets made contact, their trajectory was diverted. They couldn't penetrate his barrier of inner energy. Firearms were useless against Stephen, but they were about to reach a more populated area downtown. There were many pedestrians out and about at this time, and if a gunfight broke out, they could be caught up in the gunfire. As he thought about this, he subconsciously slowed his pace. He's slowing down, Luther said. All right, this is it. Keep shooting, Odin ordered. Just when they thought they had a chance of escaping, a siren sounded up ahead. A line of police cars surrounded the road. A police officer spoke into a microphone, instructing them to stop for an inspection. How did they get here so fast? Don't stop, Odin instructed. Keep going. They were all martial artists, so a car accident wouldn't affect them that much. On the other hand, they would be finished once Stephen caught up to them. Yes, sir. Luther kept his foot on the pedal and maintained their speed. They crashed into the blockade. Some of the police cars flipped from the impact and swerved down the road. Why are you slowing down? Speed up, Odin shouted. I'm going as fast as I can, Luther yelled back. He stepped on the accelerator, but the car kept slowing down. A thud came from the roof of the car. Odin glanced up. What was that? It's the Sovereign, Reeve shouted. By the time Odin saw Stephen through the skylight of the car, it was too late. His fist shattered the glass and slammed into Luther's head, knocking him unconscious. The car lost control. It crashed into an electrical pole and burst into flames. Stephen leaped off the roof at the last second and landed on the ground a short distance away. A subordinate from the palace knelt on one knee beside him. We've carried out your instructions. Good work. Drag them out. Several more subordinates of the palace appeared and pulled the passengers out of the car. Reeve and Blaine had sustained serious injuries during the battle, and they blacked out when the car crashed. Luther was also unconscious from the blow to his head. If Stephen hadn't held back, his brain would have splattered the dashboard. On the other hand, Odin was still conscious, but he was heavily injured. He laid motionless on the ground. His eyes had lost trace of all emotion. I've lost. Stephen walked up to him. Who exposed my identity? Odin smirked. Did you really think I would tell you? Who was it? Stephen repeated. Was it someone from the Leviathan unit, or was it the Empyrean Circle? Tell me if you don't want to experience Hellcrown Palace's interrogation. Odin's smile vanished. The palace method of interrogation was widely known to be cruel and torturous. No one had ever been able to make it to the end. If I tell you, are you going to let me go? Odin knew the answer, but he'd asked as a final struggle. Stephen looked down at him with a cold look in his eyes. No, you harm my people and my family. You're not getting away. Odin hesitated for a moment before coming clean. You know this person. It's Tyrell Fallon. He told us you were the Sovereign. Stephen's impassive expression cracked slightly. He hadn't expected his student's name to come out of Odin's mouth.
Odin observed him in amusement. The change in Stephen's expression didn't escape his notice. How do you feel? Are you surprised? Are you angry? Stephen didn't respond right away. After a brief silence, he asked, "What did you do to threaten him?" Stephen was surprised that Tyrell had exposed his identity, but he remembered him saying that he had his own reasons for accompanying Preston's team. At that time, he looked guilty and seemed like he had more to say. Stephen knew what kind of person Tyrell was. If he revealed his identity, that could only mean that Vindictus had threatened him somehow. "Aren't you worried that he's one of us now?" Odin asked. "Tyrell is my student. I might have fallen for it if you found someone else to frame, but I know him better than you do. What did you do to him?" "The trust you have for your student is admirable. I didn't do much. I just mentioned his fiancée and forced him to tell me." "I see. Underhanded methods like that suit your organization," Stephen said sarcastically. "I would expect nothing less." Odin's grin returned. "Underhanded? I can do anything if it means the downfall of your country. But it sounds like you care more about the people around you than the country itself." Stephen didn't reply to his comment. "You plotted against Tyrell and planned to frame him a while ago, didn't you?" He'd guessed the situation from the moment Odin had revealed himself. "Your speculations are correct. It was my plan. It was going smoothly until the end. I didn't think you were this strong." "I have one last question. Who's supporting your organization?" Odin's smile disappeared. "I advise you not to ask." Stephen frowned. It seemed like there was something going on in the shadows that he wasn't aware of. He repeated his question, but Odin didn't answer. He closed his eyes and turned away. It was clear that was all Stephen would be getting out of him. "Take him away and interrogate him." A subordinate from the palace stepped forward to restrain Odin. At that moment, someone called out to them, "Wait a minute." Stephen turned to see the leader of the Leviathan unit heading their way with the higher-ups. They greeted him respectfully. "I'm not the sovereign anymore," Stephen replied. "You don't have to be so polite. What brings you out here?" The leader exchanged glances with the higher-ups. "We would like to take him into our custody." Stephen gave him a questioning look. Sydney came forward to explain. "That man is the leader of Vindictus, but he came here as a representative of Warhawk's delegation team. That's his cover on the surface. Negotiations have been tense so far. If he dies in our country, conflict will be unavoidable." "I'm disappointed in you. Our country has the Sovereign and the Empyrean Circle on our side. Why are you acting so cowardly?" The leader had expected this reaction from Stephen, and he'd already prepared his answer. "Your retirement is confidential. No one knows about this yet. The Empyrean Circle is skilled, but they're far from what you were capable of. Warhawk is pressuring us during the negotiations. This is the only way we can gain the upper hand." Stephen motioned for his subordinates to stop what they were doing and gestured to Odin. "Are you aware of what he's done? He framed Tyrell." The Leviathan unit whirled around and stared at the man lying on the ground in shock. They'd only heard that Vindictus was in the country and assumed that they'd smuggled their way in by blending in with Warhawk's delegation team. They'd also heard that Stephen was chasing them down. Vindictus was the Leviathan unit's biggest enemy, but the most important thing right now was to deal with the negative public opinion that Warhawk had caused with their arrival. When they saw Stephen with the Vindictus members, their initial reaction was to stop him from killing them, because that would worsen the situation and cause tension to escalate. But things were different now that they knew that a member of Warhawk's representatives had framed Tyrell. That fact alone could resolve this conflict. "Do you still want to let him off?" Stephen asked. "No, we agree with your judgment," the leader said. "Okay, I'll leave the rest to you." Stephen faced the palace's subordinates. "Let's go." At his command, they disappeared in an instant. Lance called out to Stephen before he could leave. "Mr. Adams, are you really not planning to return to your position?" "I've resigned. This has nothing to do with me anymore. I'm sure you'll be able to find a successor soon enough." Stephen turned around with a wave and vanished. The leader of the Leviathan unit patted Lance's shoulder. "Mr. Adams isn't interested. Let's go back." Sydney sighed. We were just trying to prevent a conflict from breaking out between our two countries. I didn't think one of Warhawk's representatives was behind all of this." Another higher-up chimed in. "It's all thanks to Mr. Adams. Warhawk had the advantage, but not anymore. We need to give them a taste of their own medicine. They tarnished our reputation, so we'll do the same to them." Elsewhere, Stephen had regrouped with the palace's subordinates. "Mr. Adams, wouldn't it be more appropriate for us to handle Vindictus?" "The Leviathan unit can handle it. I'm an ordinary person now. I just want to live a normal life. You may leave." "Yes, sir." The palace's subordinates disappeared, leaving Stephen alone on the road. He turned to head back to the Cassidy family's residence. He'd been gone for a long time. When he got back, the family would probably be waiting for him with their complaints. At the hotel, Brent was leaning back in his chair with a glass of high-grade red wine in his hand. He took a sip. The taste was bitter and mellow. Did Odin respond? "Not yet," his subordinate replied. "Why is he taking so long?" "He might have something urgent going on," his subordinate said. If he wasn't careful with his words, Brent could fly into a rage and take his anger out on him. He hadn't forgotten how Brent had tossed one of his colleagues out of a plane on their way here. Fortunately, Brent was convinced by his answer. "That's true. Let's just wait then." His subordinate breathed a sigh of relief and left the room. In the corridor, he ran into Preston's team. This wasn't his first time running into them. Ever since they arrived in the U.S., Preston's team had come over several times to invite them to another round of negotiations. As Brent's subordinate, he believed his status was higher than theirs and wasn't afraid to show it. "What are you doing here?" he asked them arrogantly, even though he already knew the answer. He realized he'd miscalculated when Preston walked over with an intimidating look on his face. "Warhawk's delegation team will be expelled from our country." "What did you say?" Preston ignored the subordinate and motioned for the armed personnel behind him to open the door. "What are you doing? This is Mr. Brent's hotel room," the subordinate protested. When he tried to stop them, they pressed him to the ground. He struggled to break free from their hold. "Let go of me! I'm a member of the Robinson family." The commotion in the corridor was loud, and it alarmed Brent, who was still inside. He ordered one of his subordinates to check on the situation. His subordinate returned in a fluster. "A group of armed personnel are outside the door." Brent stood up abruptly. Before he could leave the room, the door flew open, and Preston appeared with a group of armed men. Brent's subordinates tried to block them, but the armed personnel pushed them to the floor and held them down. Brent had a bad feeling about this, but he composed himself when he thought about how he was a representative from Warhawk. The U.S. wouldn't be able to do anything to him. "Preston? Is this how your country treats its guests? Let go of my subordinates. Or are you trying to make an enemy out of Warhawk?" Preston chuckled in response. Brent was annoyed when he didn't take him seriously. "What are you laughing at? Are you mocking me? I'm warning you now, if you know what's good for you, take your people and get out of here." "We're not the ones who should leave," Preston said. "You and your team aren't welcome in our country." Brent didn't know why he was acting like this. Preston's team had been swallowing their anger and treating them politely ever since they arrived. Where did this sudden change in attitude come from? "The Leviathan unit has instructed for you and your team to be expelled from the U.S. immediately," Preston explained. "Anyone who violates their orders will be arrested on the spot." "Has the Leviathan unit lost their minds?" Brent demanded. "Have you forgotten what happened to my son? Where's my compensation?" Preston had been keeping his anger in check since Brent's arrival. Now that Warhawk's representatives no longer had the upper hand, his pent-up frustrations exploded. "Aren't you ashamed to use your son for compensation? You plotted against our country and ruined our reputation. Do you think we wouldn't find out?" "Preston, you represent the U.S. I hope you'll take responsibility for your accusations. Tyrell Fallon killed my son. That video is evidence. Stop twisting the truth." "Twisting the truth? You couldn't even tell the video was edited." Preston held out a document. "Our analysis of the video was recently completed. This report marks 13 discrepancies, and you're telling me that Warhawk didn't notice? Your country's technology must not be as advanced as they claim." Brent snatched the document and threw it on the floor without reading it. He stepped on it and dug his heels into the page. "Did you think I'd fall for such an obvious trick?" Preston calmly held out his hand to his subordinate, who handed him a flash drive. "Mr. Brent, this contains the truth. I don't know if you have the courage to see it for yourself, but there's no need to rush. I'll give you two options. The first is to run back to Warhawk and make a public apology. The other option is to watch the video on this flash drive and then be imprisoned in our country for your crime." Brent snorted. "You're threatening to imprison me? I dare you to lay a hand on me." Preston stood his ground. "Make your choice." Brent sat back down and crossed his legs. "Why wouldn't I have the courage to watch the video? What are you waiting for? Play it." Preston was disappointed in his decision. He walked over to the LCD TV and inserted the flash drive. The video appeared on the screen. Brent was smug at first, but as the video progressed, his expression turned grave. Preston stared at him like he was a fool. The higher-ups had given him a chance, but he dug his own grave instead. "What do you have to say for yourself? Do you have any objections?" The video contained the Leviathan unit's interrogation with Odin. He had no reservations about revealing his plan and claimed that Brent had orchestrated the entire scheme, including Adler's assassination. Brent rarely lost his composure, but he found it hard to stay calm in the face of overwhelming evidence against him. "His claims are false. This is slander." Preston wasn't deterred by his outburst. He signaled to the soldiers behind him. "Take him away." Two armed personnel restrained Brent and escorted him to the door. He protested hysterically. "You can't do this to me. I'm an important member of the royal family in Warhawk. If you detain me, my country will declare war on the U.S. If you don't want that to happen, then let me go." No one paid any attention to him. Preston's team escorted Brent out of the presidential suite. The rest of Warhawk's delegation team was in the corridor with the armed personnel restraining them. Many of them didn't know what was going on. They yelled arrogantly at the personnel. They were confident that when Brent arrived, he would teach these people from the U.S. a lesson. Preston went up to them. "Are you waiting for your superior? He's made his decision. He'll be taken away for trial." The delegation team looked behind him and saw Brent staring at the floor, avoiding eye contact. His hands were cuffed, and two armed personnel were escorting him down the corridor. The delegation team, who'd been fervently resisting, quieted down. Their strongest backer was Brent, but he couldn't even help them now. Preston scanned the crowd, making sure he hadn't missed anything. "Take them all away." Later that day, the first piece of news to be reported on the evening news channel was Warhawk's conspiracy. Public opinion shifted in the United States' favor. Who knew Warhawk was so sinister? They set our country up. They can't be trusted. This whole fiasco was a self-directed act of self-sacrifice. They were willing to kill their own flesh and blood just to ruin another country's reputation. Warhawk's people are cold-blooded. At the same time, an uproar broke out among the international public. No one had seen this coming. The U.S. was at a disadvantage only days before, but they'd managed to turn the tables in such a short amount of time and expose Warhawk's scheme. The people of Warhawk were initially quiet because their country was at fault. Eventually, they started to speak up in the United States' defense because they had the upper hand. Warhawk was the strongest country in the world, and the smaller countries usually took caution and avoided antagonizing them when they had the advantage. But this time, the U.S. was involved, and they were a major world power. The basis of their strength was different from Warhawk's, but while they didn't have the upper hand until recently, the issue had become a matter of public opinion. The truth had been revealed, and there was substantial evidence that it was Warhawk's scheme. As such, Warhawk could only suffer a loss. The Robinson family wasn't the only prestigious family in Warhawk. There were several royal families that controlled the economy. When Warhawk received a heavy blow from public opinion, the officials pushed all of the responsibility onto the Robinson family and claimed that it was an individual act. At the Robinson family's mansion in Warhawk, a man was throwing expensive objects around the room to vent his anger. "Who do the Dawson and Whitman families think they are to shove all the blame onto my family? We were allies when we attacked the U.S. together, but the moment something happens, they turn their back on us." The maids in attendance hid outside the door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. They were worried that they would lose their lives if their employer noticed them. The furious man in the room was Samir Robinson, the head of the Robinson family. After a while, the commotion in the room ceased. The butler scolded the maids in attendance and told them to return to their duties. Then he walked past them and knocked on the door. The man's voice rang out. "Come in." The butler pushed open the door and went inside. He greeted the man respectfully. When the man saw who it was, he held in his rage. "You don't have to be so polite to me." The butler remained unmoved. "The hierarchy exists for a reason. You are the head of the family, while I'm merely a servant." He was insistent, so Samir didn't push him. Instead, he let out a sigh. "That foolish brother of mine constantly makes me worried." "Mr. Brent has been impulsive since he was young," the butler said. "He doesn't think too deeply about things." As Brent's brother, Samir knew his personality better than anyone. With the Robinson family supporting him, he'd always gotten his way since childhood, and he became even more arrogant as he grew up. "I've contacted the U.S. officials and requested for them to send Brent back to Warhawk. They're not easy to bargain with. I had no choice but to compensate them." A pained expression appeared on Samir's face. The Robinson family was one of the wealthiest families in the country, but this had not been a small expenditure. "He's your younger brother," the butler reasoned. "There's nothing wrong with paying for his freedom." "I know, but there's controversy among the family. They don't think it's necessary to waste so much money on him. His status and his authority are divided. He's barely able to maintain his position even with my protection." When Samir started getting upset again, the butler tried to calm him down. "I believe Mr. Brent had his reasons for doing what he did." "I hope so. Let this be a lesson for him. He needs a reality check. It's not practical for him to fight for my position. He should concentrate on assisting me instead. With the two of us working together, we can suppress the Dawson and Whitman families and be the sole holder of Warhawk's power. It'll be enough to drive the U.S. to the ground and wash away our shame." The public was unaware that the three royal families of Warhawk were having an intense internal struggle for power. The current monarch of the country was about to abdicate his throne, and a new king would be selected among the three royal families. This was precisely the reason why Brent had been put in charge of Warhawk's diplomatic affairs. Everyone else was too preoccupied with taking over the throne to care about diplomacy. Because of Brent's position, he had boldly declared war, even though he knew it wouldn't be that simple to start a conflict between the two countries. Now that Brent was imprisoned in the U.S., there was no one to deal with the public, and negative public opinion had spiraled out of control. "Let's not worry about the other issues right now," Samir said. "Focus on dealing with the Dawson and Whitman families." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Stephen was on the rooftop of a hotel with Tyrell and Lana kneeling in front of him. "Mr. Adams, this is my fault," Tyrell pleaded. "I'll take responsibility. Lana had nothing to do with it." After Stephen returned on the day his daughter was kidnapped, he had turned a deaf ear to the sarcastic remarks of the Cassidy family and brought Kim and Valeria back to their villa. Tyrell had wanted to chase after them and explain himself, but the Cassidy family had held him back. DeAndre had requested for him to join them for a meal. DeAndre's martial arts were considered ordinary within the Fallon family, but because he was Wayne's uncle, he held a high status. Tyrell was a member of the Empyrean Circle, but DeAndre's seniority made it difficult to turn him down. And so, Tyrell was forced to have a meal with the Cassidy family and join them for this and that until the entire night had gone by. The next day, he found an opportunity to slip out of the house and hurried to find Stephen. One thing had led to another, and now Tyrell was kneeling with his mind racing anxiously. He knew his teacher hated betrayals, and he was worried that Stephen would cut all ties with him and end their teacher and student relationship. Moreover, Stephen was the aristocrat's leader, and he had the authority to exact punishment. Tyrell had the Leviathan unit's backing, so he knew that even if he had to face severe consequences, it wouldn't be to the point where he would lose his life. But Lana was an ordinary member of the Chevalier family. She didn't have any support. Tyrell believed that Stephen wasn't the type of person who indiscriminately killed innocent people, but to be on the safe side, he pulled her along to the villa. As for Stephen, he stared at Tyrell and Lana. thinking about how he should handle this situation. It was true that Tyrell had revealed his identity, but given the circumstances, he'd been forced into a corner and didn't have a choice. Aside from that, he hadn't overstepped his boundaries in any other way. After contemplating for a while, Stephen decided to give him another chance. Tyrell had been kneeling for so long that his legs were beginning to cramp. Just as he was about to shift his posture, Stephen spoke. "Don't let this happen again." Tyrell brightened. A heavy weight was lifted off his chest. He knew that this was Stephen's way of telling him that he'd forgiven him. "Thank you, Mr. Adams. I'll make sure there won't be a next time." Lana also thanked Stephen. He was the aristocrats' leader, and every member of an aristocratic family was his subordinate. "All right, I'm leaving. Tell the Leviathan unit that I've retired. No matter what happens, don't come looking for me." "Understood," Tyrell said. With that, Stephen disappeared from the roof. Tyrell stood up and exchanged a surprised glance with Lana. "I don't think Mr. Adams would let this go so easily." "Well, I didn't think your teacher would turn out to be the aristocrats' leader," Lana said with a smile. Tyrell laughed and took her hand. "I never thought he'd take me on as a student either. Let's go home." After Valeria was kidnapped, Stephen had tightened the security around his family. He'd sent a new batch of the palace's bodyguards to keep an eye on Kim and Valeria from a distance at all times. Nora would be out of commission for some time, so Wes and Aston took over his responsibilities and oversaw Stephen's family's security. When Stephen went home, he saw Kim playing with Valeria. Kim had taken a temporary leave and left her assistants to take care of both companies. She felt responsible for the recent incident. If she hadn't been so busy with work, she could have kept a closer eye on Valeria. Stephen didn't want Kim to know the inside story, so he'd asked Tyrell not to tell the Cassidy family. Everyone thought Valeria had been kidnapped because the culprit wanted the Cassidy family's wealth and influence. There weren't that many people who knew the truth, and everyone who'd been involved in the kidnapping had been captured. It wasn't that hard to keep the incident confidential, including his identity as the sovereign. With the palace's resources, Stephen was confident that something like this would never happen again in the future. After half a year of extradition negotiations, the U.S. finally agreed to release Brent and send him back to Warhawk. At this time, Brent was on a ship heading back to his home country. He was dressed in a prisoner's uniform and no longer had his arrogance from 6 months ago. He looked haggard from his time in prison. The Leviathan unit member who'd been responsible for sending Brent back had unlocked the cell and ushered him onto the deck. "Remember what we agreed upon. From now on, you're not allowed to show your face under formal occasions. This is our condition for sending you back. If you go against our agreement, be prepared for conflict. Warhawk's officials paid a huge price for your release. It would be in your best interest to not waste their generosity." He escorted Brent down to the docks to complete the handover before leaving the port. Brent was filled with rage as he watched the ship depart. He vowed to take his revenge one day. The butler was here to pick him up. He addressed Brent with respect and didn't treat him as a former inmate. "Mr. Brent, I'll take you home. Your brother would like to see you after you wash up. Please prepare yourself." The butler had handled the handover procedures to bring Brent home as soon as possible to prevent the Dawson and Whitman families from obtaining any information to use against them. The butler didn't possess any real authority, but the influential figures in Warhawk knew that he was the trusted aide of the Robinson family. He was also the most skilled martial artist in the family. Brent never submitted to anyone, but the butler was different. Brent was at the peak of the Grandmaster realm, but he wouldn't be able to last more than 10 moves against the butler in a fight. He would be safe as long as he had the butler on his side. An hour later, Samir, Brent, and the butler were gathered in a private room in the Robinson family's mansion. Samir was sitting on the couch with the butler waiting beside him. In front of them was the somewhat reserved Brent. The servants had been dismissed from the room, so they could have a private conversation. Samir wasn't angry, but he spoke in an imposing and authoritative manner. "Why did you threaten the U.S. at such a crucial moment?" Brent was aware that if he didn't have a reasonable explanation to defend himself, he would be confined in the mansion for the rest of his life and lose his freedom. To the people of Warhawk, freedom was the most important aspect of life. Brent swallowed nervously and organized his words before speaking. That's not what happened. I was falsely accused. Odin is my son's subordinate. He ordered Vindictus to assassinate Adler to frame a member of the Empyrean Circle. I didn't know about it. They used me to threaten the US while I was grieving. Samir nodded. What else? He knew his brother very well. Family affection was just an excuse. His son's death wouldn't compel him to go against a world power like the US. It wasn't worth the risk. There had to have been another reason. Brent hesitated. While he was imprisoned, he'd undergone hypnosis to erase certain memories of his time in the US. But because of his resentment, he'd miraculously retained a key piece of information. Are you going to tell me or not? Samir asked impatiently. If you don't come clean, you won't be able to take a single step out of this mansion for the rest of your life. You know what's going on with the three royal families. You caused trouble at a critical time and made our family pay an enormous sum to get you out. You should know the consequences. With the threat of his freedom being taken away, Brent finally gave in. The two of them had grown up together, and he knew better than anyone how outstanding his brother was. Samir was more talented than him in every way. Brent had developed a sense of inferiority and fear toward him. When he thought about his future and his revenge, he knew his best option would be to tell the truth. Odin provided me with an important piece of information. I know the Sovereign's identity. Samir was taken aback. The Sovereign's identity was indeed an important piece of information. Warhawk currently did not have an organization that could infiltrate the Leviathan unit and investigate the Sovereign. Like the people of the US, the Robinson family was also curious as to who he was. If Samir had access to this information, he could threaten the US, pressure them, and secure his position in Warhawk. It would be an advantageous bargaining chip. So far, they'd had to tread carefully when it came to the US, because the Sovereign's identity was a mystery. Everyone had a weakness, including the Sovereign, but they couldn't target him if they didn't know who they were up against. The Sovereign was famous for possessing invincible martial arts. There were countless martial artists around the world who wanted to challenge him and take him down. Samir sat up straighter as he thought about the endless prospects. Who is the Sovereign? The Sovereign is the former Commander-in-Chief of the US, Stephen Adams, Brent said. He cultivates a unique martial arts technique. At that time, I was convinced that a member of the Empyrean Circle killed my son, so I wanted to use his death to make the US officials pressure the Sovereign into giving me his technique. I didn't realize until later that Odin was the culprit all along, and he shifted all the blame onto me. Did you get the technique in the end? Samir asked expectantly. If he had the Sovereign's technique at his disposal, he could build an army of martial artists as strong as him. No, the Sovereign was stubborn and rejected my proposal. Odin said he would bring his people to threaten him, but as you know, he failed and framed me. Samir lost interest when he heard that Brent hadn't been able to get the Sovereign's technique. The rest of the details weren't important. Take this as a lesson. I understand, Brent said. He had to rely on Samir's support, so he couldn't go against him. While you were imprisoned, your authority was divided, Samir explained. I helped you retain your position in the family, but retrieving your original authority will be a slow and steady process. Brent was relieved that at the very least, he still had his position, but he wasn't too thrilled about it. He used to be a high-ranking tycoon in Warhawk with a prestigious reputation that he'd painstakingly upheld over the years. But after what happened in the US, his authority had diminished. He didn't hold any actual power. His status had been reduced to what Adler's had been before he was killed. After Samir got the information he wanted, he didn't hesitate to kick Brent out of the room. It's been a while since you came home. Why don't you take a look around? We have something else to discuss. Brent nodded and left the room. After his meeting with Samir, he was determined to take over his brother's position as the head of the family and become the king. That was the only way to get his revenge on the US. Samir didn't care about Brent's resentment. Even if Brent tried to improve himself for 100 years, he still wouldn't compare to him. What do you think we should do? Samir asked the butler when they were alone. Now that we know who the Sovereign is, we should take action against him. Yes, but we're in no hurry, the butler replied. We need to deal with the Dawson and Whitman families first. You're right, but we could send a small team to the US to make preparations. That's true. How about you leave this to me? The butler suggested. Samir agreed. Okay, I don't have to worry about anything if you're taking care of it personally. There was a prison in Annapolis that was relatively unknown. It was called the Seven Stars Prison, and it was only second to the Abyssal Penitentiary. Its prisoners were stronger and more ruthless. They were typically from the U.S., while the Abyssal Penitentiary mainly imprisoned international criminals. Vito was a special case because he'd reached the immortal realm, and the Seven Stars Prison wouldn't have been enough to restrain him. The Seven Stars Prison was encased in an array developed by a skilled martial artist named Emery. It had been designed to reduce any martial artist's strength by more than half. A martial grandmaster who could split mountains with one punch wouldn't be able to defeat an ordinary martial artist of the same realm when they were under the array's influence. The Abyssal Penitentiary was more well-known than the Seven Stars Prison because of its dangerous location. It had been built at the bottom of the sea. The natural terrain ensured the prisoners' confinement and greatly reduced the need for intensive security. On the contrary, the security of the Seven Stars Prison was much more advanced. In addition to the array, its designer, Emery, was a guard at the prison. 3 of the 10 members of the Empyrean Circle were also on duty. Moreover, nearly half of the martial artists ranked on the Combat Sovereign rankings were training nearby. If anything unexpected happened at the prison, they could rush over in less than 3 minutes to assist. Every guard at the prison was equipped with a special token that alleviated the effects of the array. Even if a prisoner were to break out, they would have to face the guards with half of their strength. With such an extensive security system in place, it was unlikely for any prisoner to escape successfully. Odin had been imprisoned in the deepest level. The Vindictus members who'd been captured with him had been executed. He was the only one remaining. The Leviathan unit had tried multiple times to find out where Vindictus's headquarters was located, but he'd refused to talk. They had no choice but to keep him alive for the time being. Iron chains had been fastened to shackles around his wrists and ankles to prevent him from attempting to escape. The long corridor was filled with the echoes of the prisoners' angry shouting. They only had one way of venting their frustrations. They cursed without a filter, and the noise was enough to drive anyone crazy. The heavy iron door leading to the deepest area of the prison creaked open. An armed guard led a young man from the Leviathan unit through the checkpoints and arrived at Odin's cell. "We're here," the guard announced. "Arrange a private room for the interrogation," the man said. When the other prisoners saw him, they directed their insults at the man. The guard tried to get them to quiet down. "Sir, please don't mind them. They've lost their minds. Longtime prisoners typically end up like them." The man shrugged. "It's not my first time coming here. I know what they're like. However," he pointed at the prisoner who had criticized him the loudest, "let him out." The prisoner heard their conversation and continued to yell arrogantly. The guard reached for his keys, but he hesitated when he reached the cell. "Is there something wrong?" the man asked. His tone was low and threatening. No, I'll unlock the cell right away." When the door to the cell opened, the man held out his hand. The prisoner stopped mid-sentence when the skin on the lower half of his face was forcefully torn off. He screamed and fell to his knees, rolling on the ground to relieve the pain. The other prisoners shrank back into their cells. No one dared to utter a word. In an instant, the entire corridor became much quieter. The man sneered. "Is that all it takes to make you all settle down? Why don't you repeat what you just said? I don't mind making you look like him." A minute passed, and no one responded. He spat on the ground and scanned the crowd. What a bunch of cowards. The guard locked the cell and headed to the interrogation room with the Leviathan unit member. When they were out of earshot, one prisoner kicked the bars of his cell. The sound echoed through the corridor. "He's taking advantage of the array to torture us." An elderly man was lying on the bed in the next cell. He opened his eyes. "There's nothing you can do about it. The array is suppressing our cultivation. That man was only a Grand Master. Even if they let you out, you won't be able to beat him." The prisoner scoffed. "He's just a Grand Master. I've killed many martial artists like him before. I can't stand him." He glanced at the elderly man in the next cell. "Gideon, did your long prison sentence mellow you out? You're not as hot-tempered as you used to be. You don't even care if some brat looks down on you." Gideon closed his eyes, not falling for the provocation. Those with great ambition don't care about the minor details. Shouldn't you know that by now, Enzo? If you ask me, it's laughable that the Leviathan unit caught you and threw you into this prison. Enzo snorted and said nothing. Those words had hit his sore spot. But Gideon didn't care. He continued. How does it feel to be betrayed by Titus Ward, your own student? I heard he's been locked up in the Abyssal Penitentiary. Why don't you break out and take your revenge? Enzo glowered at him. The first thing I do when I get out is kill that bastard. Before Gideon could reply, another prisoner burst into laughter and interrupted their conversation. You think you can just waltz out of here? That's none of your business, Bennett, Enzo shot back. He's right, though, Gideon said. 10 years in this prison feels like a day. I've lost all hope of getting out. Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett were the strongest martial artists in the Seven Stars prison. They used to be famous figures in the past. To cultivate his dark arts, Gideon had taken advantage of Vito's rampage a century ago and slaughtered several cities and towns. Tens of thousands of innocent people died by his hands. It was only when Sal, one of the 5 erudites, made his move that he was captured and imprisoned. Enzo and Bennett appeared 30 years after Vito's rebellion. One of them had gone on a killing spree in the eastern region of the U.S., while the other had killed left and right in the western region. The country had suffered great losses after Vito's rampage, and 30 years hadn't been enough for them to recover completely. The Leviathan unit had to send Emery, the martial artist who designed the prison's array, to put a stop to their massacre. Decades had passed since then, and the 3 of them were no longer as famous as they used to be. But some of the people in the country still had some sort of impression of them. Enzo was displeased by how easily Gideon had given up on escaping, and he had to admit that it was a fact. There was no hope of breaking out of here. The officials were concerned about the backlash they would receive if they killed them off, but they couldn't let them escape either, so they were fated to spend the rest of their lives here. An unfamiliar voice resounded through the corridor. Do you want to leave? Enzo looked around in alarm. Who's there? Who are you? You don't need to know who I am. Just answer my question. Do you want to leave? Gideon sat up on the bed. He wasn't as calm as before. Sir, how are we supposed to believe you if you hide in the shadows? Why don't you show yourself? Then we can talk. Like Enzo, Gideon was also trying to search for the source of the voice, but it was impossible to determine its exact location because the voice came from all directions. You're not qualified to know my identity. Let's make a deal. I'll let you out if you agree to cause chaos in the prison. When you fulfill your end of the bargain, I'll let you see the light of day again. Gideon was suspicious of the mysterious voice. He knew Enzo and Bennett felt the same way. He decided to test him. You can let us out? Sure, I'll accept your deal, but the array limits our cultivation. Even if we're freed from our restraints and the cell, we'll only be as strong as our Grand Master. The Leviathan unit imprisons dangerous criminals here, so they've taken extra precautions. We might not be a match for the guards. The underlying meaning of his words was a message to the mysterious man. 3 Grand Masters would not be able to stir up a wave. Gideon had been imprisoned for decades. He'd lost all hope of getting out, but he didn't mind having a conversation with the mysterious man. He had his suspicions, but there was a possibility that the man could release him, and he couldn't pass up the chance. If I can get you 3 out, I can also make the array lose its effectiveness, the voice said. He sounded confident, as if the famous array that was the backbone of the prison's security was nothing worth mentioning. You've already agreed, so let's get you out of your cell. A breeze swept through the prison, and a man wearing a black robe appeared at the center of the corridor, hovering above the ground. Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett could sense the enormous energy inside him. The man lightly waved his hand, and the shackles around Gideon's wrists shattered. Gideon looked down at his hands and blinked. He couldn't believe that the indestructible shackles had been broken so easily. The man didn't stop there. He threw a talisman through the bars of the cell. The instant it came in contact with Gideon, his aura surged, and he broke through the Grandmaster realm and returned to his peak condition. The man wasn't interested in the process.
After throwing the talisman, he turned to Enzo and Bennett. "What about you two? Are you going to take me up on my offer?" The two of them were in a daze and didn't reply. Under normal circumstances, the man would have raised his voice, but when he thought about his mission, he patiently repeated himself. "Will you accept my deal?" Enzo and Bennett shared a look before nodding. The man broke their shackles and gave them a talisman. The other prisoners began to clamor after witnessing the scene. They shouted for the mysterious man to release them as well. But the man ignored them. Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett were half a step away from reaching the immortal realm, but the rest of the prisoners were at most at the beginning stages of the Divine Grand Master realm. It wouldn't be worth it to waste the talismans on them. Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett easily broke out of the cells. They treated the man with much more respect now that they were freed. "What would you like us to do?" "I don't care what you do. Just start a riot. The bigger, the better. I'm going to destroy the array. I'll leave the rest to you." The man took a step back and vanished into the darkness. The three of them had returned to their peak condition, but they still hadn't been able to tell how he was capable of appearing and disappearing at will. "Should we just leave?" Enzo asked tentatively. "No, didn't you sense his martial arts?" Gideon said. "If we go back on our end of the deal, he'll hunt us down and kill us." "I'm not afraid of him. If all else fails, I'll just go into hiding." Enzo sounded tough and refused to admit that he was afraid, but Gideon and Bennett could hear the trepidation in his voice. Bennett spoke up. "All right already, it's just a riot. Don't tell me you two aren't confident in breaking out of here when the array's gone up in smoke. Our cultivation was suppressed for decades, but we're back to normal with that talisman. Even Emery won't stand a chance against us." "Then we'll have no choice but to help you," Enzo said, still refusing to admit that he was scared of the mysterious man. He turned to Gideon. "How should we go about it?" Gideon chuckled and raised his hand. His inner energy filled the air. "Release all of the prisoners, of course. What's a riot with only 3 people? At the core of the array, an elderly man with white hair and a beard sat at the center of the room with a flask of wine in his hand. He was the designer of the array, Emery. He opened his eyes when he sensed a presence. "Who's there?" The man in a black robe stepped out of the darkness. "Did the array heighten your senses? That's the only way you could have sensed my arrival." Emery could sense his malicious intentions. "Who are you? Unauthorized personnel are not allowed in here." "That's none of your business," the man said. "If you get out and give me control of the array, I'll spare your life." "Who do you think you're threatening?" The man had been able to pass through layers of security and made it to the core of the array, but Emery was confident that he could take him down alone. He was the designer of the array, and this was his territory. And with his cultivation, no one could go against him. Emery made the first move. With a wave of his hand, numerous shadows with sharpened tips manifested out of thin air and struck the man. An explosion shook the room. Emery knew that wasn't enough to kill him, but he would be incapacitated. He took out his phone to call the Leviathan unit, but before he could dial their number, the man's voice echoed. "Your array is impressive. It can make a divine grandmaster like you one step away from reaching the immortal realm." The man stepped past the cloud of smoke with a single scratch on his body. Emery's expression turned serious. He'd held back, but his attack should have been enough to injure divine grandmasters. If this man was unharmed, then his cultivation was more profound than he'd expected. "Who are you? You're provoking the Leviathan unit by trespassing." "Is that the best you can do? Threaten me by dropping the Leviathan unit's name?" "Don't cross the line. Your cultivation is impressive, so it'd be a waste for you to die here. If you leave, I'll pretend this didn't happen." The man laughed. "And what exactly can a divine grandmaster do to me? Show me instead of wasting your breath." Emery's eyes flashed. "This time, I won't hold back." He formed a hand seal, manifesting an illusion of shadowy waves. When his incantation was complete, the illusion solidified and crashed down on the man with the force of the real ocean. "Is that it?" the man asked, making no move to defend. "Even with the array backing you up, your technique is only average." The man simply held out his hand.
When the phantom ocean collided with his palm, the waves were redirected at Emery. Emery didn't have time to react. He was swept into the illusory ocean. The waves came one after another. It was endless. When the waves finally disappeared, Emery was on his knees, soaking wet. 80% of his inner energy was gone. The man applauded him in surprise. "What a shame. You're still alive." Emery barely managed to lift his head. "Who are you?" The mysterious man had deflected his technique with one hand and redirected it at him with a force that was 10 times stronger. "I told you before. That's none of your business." The man stepped past him and walked to the center of the room. He wrapped his fingers around the core of the array with a crazed look in his eyes. He tightened his grip. The core shattered and exploded into a burst of light. Emery was forced to watch helplessly. Now that the array had been broken, the prisoners would roam the land once more, and the country would descend into chaos. The culprit was right in front of him, but he couldn't do anything to stop him. In the interrogation room, the young man from the Leviathan unit was sitting on a comfortable sofa with a glass of wine in his hand. Odin was standing in front of him, with shackles around his wrists and ankles. "Talk. Who established Vindictus? Why does your organization exist?" Odin didn't respond. He lowered his head like a puppet. "The Leviathan unit has questioned you many times. Make my job easier and answer the question." When Odin still didn't reply, the young man began to threaten him. He threw his glass at Odin's face, drenching him in wine. Fragments of glass cut his skin. Odin didn't react. The young man grabbed his collar and pulled him forward. He slapped him across the face, sending him tumbling to the ground. "Are you going to talk or not?" The guard tried to stop him. "Sir, he's going to die if you keep this up." The young man shot him a glare. "Are you sure you want to get in my way?" The guard held his tongue when he remembered his brutality from earlier. He tried a different approach. "Sir, the higher-ups have instructed us to keep him alive." The young man paused and headed to the door. "Fine. Take him back to his cell. I'll interrogate him again tomorrow." The guard was relieved to hear that. He wouldn't be killed for trying to stop a member of the Leviathan unit, but the young man held a high position, while he was just a small-time guard at the prison. It would be all too easy for him to be transferred to a more dangerous post. Just as the young man was about to open the door, a tremor shook the room. "What's happening?" The guard didn't want to alarm him in case he did anything rash. "Nothing, it's just an earthquake. It'll be over soon." The young man didn't think too much of it. The guard wasn't worried, so earthquakes probably happened often here. The two of them didn't notice the glint in Odin's eyes. All of a sudden, the door burst open, and the prisoner who had the skin on the lower half of his face torn off walked in. His expression turned menacing when he saw the young man from the Leviathan unit. "I'm going to ruin your face like what you did to mine." The young man wasn't the least bit concerned. "I was wondering what happened. So, the prisoners broke out of their cells. The guards in this prison are incompetent. I should fire them all." He wasn't the least bit threatened. With the array in place, even a prisoner at the Martial Grandmaster realm would be restrained. He was a peak Martial Grandmaster, so he had the ability to suppress the riot alone. He was rather confident in himself. "I'm sorry, sir," the guard said apologetically. "I'll put an end to this immediately." He cursed the prisoners in his head. Why did they have to riot today? The young man from the Leviathan unit already had a bad impression of him. With this riot, he would probably be transferred to the frontier as early as tomorrow. Feeling aggrieved, the guard didn't hold anything back and vented his frustrations on the prisoner who'd barged into the room. He launched a fierce attack using the combat technique he'd learned in the army. After killing the prisoner, he would inform the others and try to minimize the damages as much as possible. These were the guard's thoughts as he struck, and they would be the last thoughts he would ever have. The prisoner threw out his fist. When they clashed, the sound of bones shattering rang out. The guard crashed into the opposite wall and collapsed in a heap. He died instantly. The young man from the Leviathan unit was confused. Typical guards stationed at the prison weren't especially strong, but they were still martial artists who were close to reaching the Grandmaster realm. The guard should have been enough to suppress the prisoners. It was strange, but the young man brushed it off and reasoned that the guard was weaker than he'd expected. With the guard out of the way, the prisoner changed his target. He flexed his hand into a claw and attacked. The young man gathered his strength and swung his fist. Even if the prisoner had the strength of a grandmaster within the array, he was at the peak of the martial grandmaster realm. This would be an easy battle. He could already foresee the prisoner's mangled body after they exchanged blows. But when they collided, the outcome was different from what he'd imagined. The young man screamed in pain. He was no longer as arrogant as before. His right arm was twisted, and his bones were shattered. The prisoner kicked the young man to the ground and slapped him, disfiguring his face. The young man cowered in the corner. "What's going on? The array isn't suppressing your cultivation." The prisoner laughed. "Did you just realize? It's too late now." He grabbed the young man and dismembered his body. This bloody scene was taking place throughout the prison. Countless guards were receiving the same treatment. For the past several decades, none of the prisoners have been brave enough to attempt an escape because of the array. The guards weren't prepared for a riot, and those who were weaker than the prisoners were quickly eradicated. During the chaos, the man in a black robe released Odin from his restraints and carried him on his back. "Those damned officials are inhumane. How could they torture you like this?" "That's not important right now. Let's leave." Hatred shone in Odin's eyes. "I swear I'll get my revenge. The Leviathan unit, the Sovereign, I'll kill them all." In the midst of the rebellion, they disappeared into the darkness.